So in my presentation, I'm going to address the paradiplomacy from a different perspective. And you're going to look at the issue of the protection of IDPs, that is internally displaced persons, and cross-border cooperation in Africa, drawing from some insights from the Great Lakes region. So just as a way of introduction, internal displacement, that is movement of people without crossing the internationally recognized borders, has been a problem that attracted the attention of the international community since the 1990s, and it's been a very big problem, especially to the African continent. So just at a glance, globally, as per the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center's global report, as of the end of 2023, we had over 75 million internally displaced persons globally. And Africa, and specifically the Sub-Saharan Africa, contributed to over 46% of the total global numbers of IDPs, with over 34 million IDPs. So, and this problem of protracted displacements in Africa is mostly due to conflicts and violence, disasters, and actually the reported figures of over 34 million refers to displacements by conflicts and violence and disasters. So due to this problem of internal displacement that continues to be experienced, or that was experienced after the end of the Cold War, there have been initiatives that have been taken, and Africa has actually been the pioneering in most of the development of the binding legal instruments in relation to internal displacements. And most of these countries that experience displacements due to conflicts and violence are situated around the Great Lakes region. So what has been unique about Africa's approach to internal displacement as a whole is the regional approach that it takes, or that it took, in developing some of its first instruments to address internal displacements. So just to introduce some of the legal framework for protection of IDPs in Africa, the first one is the United Nations Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement, which represented the first international or global instrument, though non-binding, that provides guidance to states on the approach towards the protections of internal displaced persons. So what the sub-regional organizations in Africa, for example, although the Conference of the Great Lakes region is not regional economic community per se, it was the first region where the AU and the UN began the development process of coming up with instruments to address the peace and insecurity situations that was facing the region, and hence causing displacement of people. So in 2006, there was a development of pact on peace, security, and development in the Great Lakes region. And among the issues that this pact was to address was peace, the issues of peace and insecurity and displacement situations in the Great Lakes region. Actually, up to the 2009, when the Kampala Convention was developed, this protocol to the Pact of the Great Lakes regions acted as a default IDP instrument in Africa. So what is consistent in all these regional frameworks towards IDPs in Africa is that they all emphasize the national responsibility of states in internal displacements. That is actually the primary responsibility of states. And while taking this regional approach, these regional frameworks encourage or require states to develop national laws that address IDPs. So based on this, some states have developed IDP-related laws, which are either IDP-specific laws that are specifically enacted to address displacement situations in countries, or some of them are IDP-inclusive laws. Those are laws that address different issues in different sectors, but have elements or provisions that touch on internal displacement issues. For example, the climate-related laws, disaster management-related laws, and land laws as far as the power of eminent domain of states is involved. So, well, now to ensure the commitments, because some of these, the African states and particularly regional economic communities have been based on the objectives and motivations and the regional approach that these internal displacements frameworks encourage the African states to address common issue of displacement. The RECs, or regional economic communities, have been developing laws and policies that help the states to come together and address common issues of displacement. And I will be looking at some of the instances in which East African community, for example, as a regional economic community, has addressed, or how the member states of this community have addressed internal displacements, either simply as a state or in a collaborative nature as a community, or between states, either bilaterally or multilaterally. And this is to show how these states, in commitments, or the commitments that they have as members of the state parties to the protocol, Great Lakes Region Protocol on Internal Displacements, or the Kampala Convention, achieve their commitments towards the protections of IDPs and respond to displacement situations whenever they occur. So to demonstrate some of the instances in which the EAC community as the member states of the EAC have implemented cross-border initiatives to address some of the causes of internal displacements, I will give some of the examples, which I've divided them into categories, because then I had to go to analyze each of the initiatives, or some of the initiatives that shows examples, that shows some of the instances in which there's been cross-border cooperations within states across the community. So one of the instances in which the states in EAC have collaborated to address the internal displacement issues relates to state-to-state cooperation. There's within the broader framework of the community. So in state-to-state cooperation, there have been initiatives that promote the free movement of people within the region, and there have been calls within the states and among the states to remove restrictions and allow the EAC community, people within the EAC community to move from one country to another. Though this is not fully implemented, it can help in situations of displacement situations, maybe as a result of conflict-related or disasters, for member states, local communities from the member states to move from one state to another. And in this way, then it will reduce the issue of refugees, and which is also part of the movements within the EAC. And another issue in which the EAC has addressed some of the causes of displacement, or collaborated as members of the community to address internal displacement, is the establishment of the East African Community Regional Force. In 2022, the EAC Summit agreed, and the community member states sent their troops to eastern part of the DRC to help restore peace. And one of the mandates of this force was to help in fighting the armed groups and try to promote community dialogue. This shows how the overall approach of the EAC towards displacement and refugee movement, they address it as a security issue. So that is a discussion for another day. So that's some of the ways in which they collaborated and sent troops to DRC to restore peace, which is and address conflicts, which is one of the main causes of displacements in the DRC. So, and also the states are also trying to develop common frameworks on management of refugees, and inside this framework on common management of refugees include some of the initiatives to also address internal displacement albeit in a limited sense. Another initiative that has seen some cross-border relations or cross-border cooperation in relation to IDPs is the involvement of the state-based human rights institutions to expand their or to build capacity of each human rights institution to address internal displacements. And this happened in a workshop in 2008 to actually build capacity of the human rights institutions to advocate for lobbying and holding their governments to establish IDP-related laws. Now, when it comes to the role of the subnational governments, now which is the heart of para-diplomacy, the discussions that we are having now, how subnational governments have been involved in addressing internal displacements or actually addressing internal displacement situations in some of the countries, and I will use Kenya, for example, is that there are some of the counties that have intercommunal violence, intercommunal disputes that have led to internal displacement within the counties. For example, in the North Rift region, we have different counties, for example, the West Pokot County, Turkana County, Baringo County. So these are counties that have actually there have been a lot of communal conflicts causing people to flee from their homes. And it's been a problem that is persistent, although there is no up-to-date data on the number of people displaced. There have been a lot of people being displaced, and it's persistent. So how these governments or county governments in Kenya, there is regional economic blocks within the country. So, for example, in the North Rift region of Kenya, we have the North Rift North Rift Counties Regional Economic Bloc, and some of the initiatives within their priority or strategic areas is, apart from the economic sectors that these counties come together and collaborate, they recently signed a peace agreement. And one of the issues in the peace agreements is to promote community dialogue so that it addresses people who have been displaced to go back to their homes and prevent more community fights and conflicts and that now cause displacements. So in this way, we see how the subnational governments are actually participating in within themselves in a more internal manner to address displacements within the country. However, when it comes to cross-border or international relations with other subnational governments in other countries, the issue of internal displacement in itself is a sensitive issue, an issue that touches on state sovereignty. And according to my research, I didn't find any cross-border relation or cross-border agreements in relation to movements related or IDP inclusive movements. However, we've seen some of the initiatives that county governments in Kenya have entered into bilateral agreements, bilateral investment agreements internationally, either with state countries outside, like sovereign states in Europe, for example. In relation to maybe trade and investment, we have counties like Nakuru County, they've been entering into agreements with the Dutch government because most of the flower farms within Nakuru County are owned by multinational governments that are based in Netherlands, for example. So they've been entering into agreements with the county government of Nakuru in agribusiness related and also water and sanitation. We've had counties like Uasin Gishu County has been entering into agreements or bilateral agreements with maybe Norway, for example, or Sweden for purposes of water waste management within the county, education agreements, and also health-related agreements. But when it comes to the issue of internal displacement, it is a more, it's taken as internal matter because even in the country itself, within the national government and the county government itself, there is lack of coordination between the county government and the national government in the responses to internal displacement. We see, for example, during the recent floods in Kenya, where we had, Kenya was one of the countries that was really affected by disasters in terms of flooding. And during the flooding season, the responses between the national government and the county governments was so uncoordinated that the county governments were blaming the national governments for lack of money, lack of funds. And you can see even the issues of data, the data that is provided by the government and data that is provided by humanitarian actors is different. So even the law itself, the Internal Displacement Act in Kenya itself, does not provide like clear roles between the national government and the county government in relation to protection and implementation of the Act itself in relation to internal displacement. So this is one of the challenges that makes it even complex for the subnational governments, county governments to have like cooperation across states in relation to internal displacements. So another category that I looked at is the non-state actors and internal displacement. So this involves actors like the civil society, professional bodies, and the private sector. So I looked at some of the ways in which some non-state actors have participated in IDP-related issues. And one of the instances in which I've seen a private sector, or in this instance, a professional body, that is the Pan-African Lawyers Union, which is made up of African lawyers and lawyers associations, actually instituted a public interest litigation suit against the government of Tanzania for eviction of the Maasai communities from Serengeti National Park, and the ongoing, we know that there is an ongoing planned eviction of the Maasai, or eviction of the Maasai from Ngorongoro as a national protected area. So the Pan-African Lawyers Union filed a suit and was representing the local communities and fighting for the rights of these communities. So this is one of the instances in which these lawyers coming across the continent to fight for the shared interests of the people have come together to help this community against forced eviction, which is part of the internal displacement. So these are some of the limited examples that have come across on cross-border initiatives within the EAC and internal displacements. So why are these situations limited? So I looked at some of the challenges that actually prevent the cross-border cooperation in internal displacements, and in this situation, in this case, the EAC. So one of them is the state sovereignty and an interference with internal matters. This is actually the main hindrance, and it's not only on the participation of subnational governments and cross-border relations in internal displacement matters, but in the broader internal displacement discourse, because states tend to shed or to hide that part of internal displacement, as opposed to in situations of refugee movements, states would want to present themselves as hosts or open to refugees in line to the principle of non-refoulement. But when it comes to internal displacement, where the state sometimes is involved in displacing its own people, maybe for development reasons, then they don't. That is a sensitive issue that the external actors can only intervene or when upon request by the states, which is minimal and maybe sometimes limited to humanitarian. And then the second challenge is the fragmented nature of the responses to displacement situations. So based on the causes of displacement themselves, because it's not only displacement because of conflicts and violence, disasters, and even development projects. So we have different responses for different causes of displacements. For example, the conflicts and violence, for example, it can be approached from a human rights perspective, like prevention of a gross violation of human rights in countries that experience this displacement, especially where the governments are involved. And then we have instances where it is approached from peace and regional peace and security perspective. Then we have initiatives that look at regional peace. And then we have disasters and can be looked at from the disaster risk management perspective. So all these initiatives then inhibit or prevent collaboration sometimes, or makes it complex for collaboration across states and even local governments. And then we have the political interests versus the rights of IDPs. I put there political interests because there are instances when development projects require the people, especially in land and natural resource-based development projects, where the people are sometimes required to move. So although it's supposed to be conducted in a human rights based approach, the states, and in this case, I will use an example of Kenya and Tanzania, for example, we have witnessed situations where these states or the governments or the politicians in these governments are pursuing policies that they know very well, or there have been decisions that there have been, like, the people have shown resistance to these policies, but they continue to pursue these policies and continue evicting the people. And in this sense, the public interest versus individual or community interest line cannot be seen at all. So in this instance, it cannot be like limiting the rights of the people for public interest, but it is for political interest, which then hinders the political will of the states to address internal displacement and even allow collaborations or cooperations between and among states. And then we have also the issue of lack of transparency in IDPs data. We know that data is at the heart of responses to internal displacement. And looking at the trend in states and even the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center shows the difficulty in accessing data in relation to internal displacement. So sometimes it's not that there are no internally displaced persons, but there is no data or up-to-date data. So with these challenges, there is a lot, although the ESC as a community presents opportunities for cooperations between states. For example, having like a regional community, they have the Community East African Civil Society Forum. We have the East African Association of Local Governments in the East African Community. So although they have those opportunities for collaboration between maybe the national government, the subnational governments in addressing various issues of integration across the economic, social, and political pillars, these challenges actually hinder effective cooperation and collaboration within these actors in situations of internal displacements.